My father ridiculed my military service and took the family to dinner. Then the broadcast began. Okay, lean in because this isn't just a story about an award. This is about family, validation, and a moment when the quiet truth of my life exploded onto the internet, forcing people to see what they'd willfully ignored for years. Can you imagine dedicating your entire self to something, achieving a profound milestone, only for your own family to not just dismiss it, but to actively choose dinner over celebrating you? And then, just when you think you've accepted their indifference, the internet decides to blow everything up. It all started innocently enough. I was still in my dress blues, sitting alone in my car, hands on the steering wheel, just staring. My phone buzzed once. Then again. Someone I didn't even recognize had tagged my sister, Rachel. "Isn't this your sister?" they asked. That was it. Not with a big announcement, not with applause, but with a link. A quiet pause. And then, the slow, sickening realization that the thing they had always brushed aside was now right there in their pockets, impossible to ignore. My name is Emily Carter, and I serve in the United States Air Force. Even now, saying that feels heavier than it sounds. Not because of the uniform or the responsibility, but because of the echoes in my head. Asterisk, you're just support. You're not really doing anything. Asterisk, that was my father's voice, flattening everything I did into something small, something less than. The email landed on a Wednesday afternoon. I was at my desk, under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, surrounded by government-issued furniture and stacks of folders. I almost missed it. The subject line, Quarterly Awards Banquet Official Notification, looked like a dozen others. I clicked it, skimmed the first paragraph, and then stopped. I went back to the beginning. My supervisor had submitted a package for me weeks ago. I hadn't expected it to go anywhere. Most packages just stall. They come back with notes. Or they disappear quietly. This one hadn't. The wing had approved it. I was being recognized with an Air Force Achievement Medal at the Quarterly Awards Banquet. A formal ceremony. Commander's call. Families invited. They'd record it, post it on Facebook and YouTube like they always did. I sank back in my chair. No rush of adrenaline. No urge to shout it from the rooftops. Just a deep, steady feeling in my chest. It wasn't exactly pride. It was more like confirmation. The quiet kind, the one that settles deep when something you've carried alone for so long is finally acknowledged by people who truly understand its weight. After a minute, I picked up my phone. I hesitated. Longer than I care to admit. Not because I didn't want my family there, but because inviting them felt like prying open a door I'd spent years carefully closing. But this felt important. And deep down, a smaller, older version of myself just wanted them to see it. The family group chat was exactly as I'd left it. Rachel's name at the top. My mother's heart reactions sprinkled through old messages. My father's last contribution weeks ago, a thumbs-up emoji to something Rachel had posted. I typed slowly. Asterisk K, I wanted to let you know I'm being recognized at a formal Air Force Awards banquet next Friday. It's a commander call, and families are invited. I'd really like it if you could come. Asterisk, I reread it. No exaggeration. No explanation. Just the facts. The typing bubbles appeared almost instantly. Rachel replied first. Isn't that just an internal thing, like admin work? She added a laughing emoji. Asterisk, we already have dinner plans that night. Don't be mad. Asterisk, then, a second message. This one from my father. Asterisk, awards banquet for what? You're not an officer. Sounds like a secretary award if you ask me. Asterisk, I felt that familiar tightening behind my ribs. Not sharp, not new, just there. And then my mother. She didn't type. She didn't ask a question. She just tapped the little thumbs-up icon under Rachel's message. I stared at the screen. The office hummed around me. Keyboards clicking. Printers whirring. Muted conversations drifting through the hall. No one noticed my shoulders drop. Just a fraction. I could have explained. I could have told them about my AFSC, about what my job actually involved, about the nights I stayed late, coordinating timelines, managing information flow, making sure the right people had what they needed when it mattered most. I could have said achievement medal instead of award, hoping they'd pretend it sounded more respectable. I didn't. I typed one line. Asterisk, it's okay. I understand. Asterisk, Rachel sent a wine glass emoji. My father didn't respond. My mother's thumbs up remained. I set my phone face down and went back to work. Growing up in Ohio, I learned early how to read a room and make myself smaller inside it. Rachel, 3 years older, was loud, effortlessly confident. She took up space without apologizing. My parents built their entire world around her momentum: school plays, sports banquets, celebrations that felt as automatic as gravity. I was the reliable one, the kid who didn't need reminders. When I brought home a certificate for an academic competition in middle school, my father glanced at it and said, "Good job," before sliding it into a drawer with old tax documents and instruction manuals. That drawer, that became a metaphor I carried longer than I realized. When I told them I wanted to join the Air Force after high school, the reaction was predictable. My father said it wasn't a real career. My mother worried it was dangerous. Rachel joked that I'd chosen camouflage because I was already so good at disappearing. I joined anyway. Basic training stripped me down and rebuilt me in ways my family never saw. Over time, I found a role that fit me. Structured, detail-oriented, demanding. I wasn't on the front of brochures. I wasn't in photos. I was the person people called when they needed something done right the first time. At home, none of that translated. On visits, my father introduced me as working in the military, mostly paperwork. Rachel nodded along. My mother smiled and changed the subject. I stopped correcting them years ago. It never helped. So, when the awards banquet email came, I didn't expect a miracle. I invited them, because that's what you do. Because some part of me still believed that if I laid the truth out plainly enough, they might meet it where it stood. Instead, they chose dinner. I pressed my uniform that night in silence, smoothing each crease with care. Not for them. For myself. As I hung it up, I caught my reflection. Older. Steadier. Less willing to explain. They thought it was small. They always had. What they didn't know was that the video would be posted the next day. That people from my unit would share it. That someone who recognized our last name would tag Rachel. Not with malice, just surprise. And once something like that exists online, it has a way of finding its audience, whether they're ready or not. In my family, disappointment was quiet. It lived in pauses, in glances, in the way a conversation shifted just enough to remind you where you stood. That's how I learned my place. The drawer came first. I was 11 when I won my first state-level academic competition. A small ceremony in a school gym that smelled like floor polish and popcorn. They handed me a certificate with my name spelled correctly, which felt important. I held it carefully all the way home, imagining where my parents might hang it. My father glanced at it while standing at the counter. "Good job," he said, already turning back to something else. My mother smiled and asked if I was hungry. Rachel asked if she could borrow the car later. That night, I watched my father slide the certificate into a drawer in the hallway. Not a special drawer. The one with expired warranties, spare batteries, folded instruction manuals for appliances we no longer owned. The drawer you close without thinking. I didn't say anything. I just memorized the sound it made. Rachel's things went on walls. She was the kind of child adults loved immediately. Confident, expressive. She spoke like she expected to be heard. And most of the time, she was right. When she won something, it was announced. When she failed, it was discussed at length, framed as a setback on an otherwise impressive trajectory. I was easy. Low maintenance. My parents used that word like a compliment. I learned to translate it early. You don't require much attention. My father, Richard, valued outcomes he could explain quickly to other people. Sales numbers. Promotions. Job titles that carried weight without context. He liked to say things like, "If it matters, people will know about it." He meant visibility. He meant status. My mother, Linda, believed in harmony, or at least the appearance of it. She avoided conflict the way some people avoid bad weather, by stepping inside and hoping it passed. When my father dismissed something I cared about, she would squeeze my shoulder later and say, "You know how he is," as if that explained everything. By high school, the pattern was set. Rachel took center stage. I moved through the background, competent and quiet. Teachers praised my work ethic. Counselors said I'd do well anywhere. My parents nodded, satisfied that I was on track, even if they weren't sure where that track led. The first time I mentioned the Air Force, it was during dinner. Nothing dramatic, just a sentence. I'm thinking about joining after graduation. My father didn't look up from his plate. Why? I want something structured, I said. I want to serve. Rachel laughed. That's what people say when they don't know what else to do. My mother frowned. It's dangerous. My father finally looked at me then. It's not a career, he said. It's a stopgap. I remember nodding, like I was considering his point, even though something in me had already decided. I didn't join to rebel. I joined because the Air Force offered something my family never had: clear expectations, clear standards. You either met them or you didn't. No guessing. No reading between lines. Basic training was hard in ways I'd expected and harder in ways I hadn't. But it was fair. Effort mattered. Precision mattered. Accountability mattered. When I struggled, I was corrected. When I improved, it was noted. No one asked me to be louder or shinier. They asked me to be reliable. That felt like relief. When I graduated and sent a photo home in uniform, standing straight, named Tape Crisp, my mother framed it. She put it on the hallway shelf. Not the living room. Not the office. The hallway. My father looked at it and said, "So, what's the plan after this?" After this, as if it were just a phase. Over the years, I found my lane. I trained into an AFSC that fit my strengths: coordination, information management, problem-solving under pressure. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't meant to be. It was essential. My supervisor noticed. Then her supervisor. Packages went up the chain. Most of the time, nothing came back down. That was normal. I learned not to announce things at home. When I earned an accommodation early on, I mailed a copy of the citation to my parents. My mother called to say she'd received it. "I put it somewhere safe," she said, "with your other important papers." I didn't ask where. When I visited on leave, my father introduced me to neighbors as working in the military support side. Rachel nodded along, smiling like she was in on a joke I didn't understand. I smiled, too. Correcting them felt exhausting, and exhaustion had taught me efficiency. I stopped trying to make them see me. That's what made the awards banquet email so complicated. Not because I expected them to come running, but because inviting them felt like offering one last quiet opportunity, not to celebrate me, but to meet me where I was. Their response was familiar enough that it barely hurt. Dinner plans. Laughter. A thumbs up instead of a question. The drawer closed again. Only this time, I didn't reach for it. By the time I made staff sergeant, I had stopped announcing promotions altogether. Not because they didn't matter, but because every time I tried to explain what they meant, the explanation collapsed under the weight of my family's assumptions. Rank, to them, was something you either recognized immediately or dismissed entirely. If it didn't come with a corner office or a title they'd heard on television, it didn't register as real progress. So, I learned to let my career unfold quietly. My AFSC was 3D0X1, Knowledge Operations. On paper, it sounded abstract, vague. The kind of job description people skim and then summarize incorrectly. In practice, it meant I managed information flow across units, coordinated timelines, ensured decision-makers had what they needed before problems became failures. It was not glamorous. It was not visible. And it was absolutely critical. When things worked, no one noticed. When they didn't, everything stopped. I liked that responsibility. I liked knowing that comm planning could prevent chaos. I liked being the person commanders trusted to make sense of complexity without needing credit for it. At home, it translated to one sentence. "So, paperwork," my father said once, leaning back in his chair. I didn't correct him. There's a point where explaining becomes a kind of begging. I crossed that line years earlier, and never went back. On base, my days started before sunrise. The air was cool, heavy with the smell of jet fuel and burnt coffee. I'd walk into the building, Badge clipped just right. Already reviewing the day's priorities. Briefings. Cross-checks. Calls that couldn't wait. My supervisor noticed early on that I didn't panic. When timelines shifted or information conflicted, I slowed down instead of speeding up. That mattered. In our world, clarity under pressure was currency. She started giving me more responsibility. Not loudly, not ceremonially, just quietly handing me things that mattered. Take this, she'd say. Run point. I trust you. Trust is the most honest form of recognition in the military. It doesn't come with applause. It comes with consequences. Over time, my name began to surface in places I wasn't present for. Meetings, recommendation packages, conversations that happened behind closed doors. I didn't chase them. I didn't need to. The work spoke when I didn't. At home, nothing changed. When I came back on leave, my father still asked when I was getting out. My mother still worried I was working too hard for something temporary. Rachel still rolled her eyes when I mentioned another assignment. "You're still doing that?" she asked once, genuinely confused. "I thought you'd move on by now." I looked at her and realized she wasn't being cruel. She simply couldn't imagine a life built slowly, without spectacle. That was when I stopped hoping for understanding. The awards package that eventually led to the banquet started like all the others. Quietly. My supervisor submitted it after a long quarter, where our section had absorbed extra workload without missing deadlines. She didn't tell me right away. Most supervisors don't. You submit, you wait, you manage expectations. It moved faster than I expected. Squadron level.
Group. Wing.
When she finally called me into her office and said they approved it, her voice was calm, professional, like she was telling me about a schedule change. "You'll receive an Air Force Achievement Medal at the quarterly banquet," she added. "You earned it." That was it. No confetti.
No speech.
Just confirmation. I thanked her and went back to work. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall for a long time. I thought about all the times I'd been told my job didn't count, that I was support, that I was filling time. And yet, here was an institution built on precision and accountability, saying this mattered. That contrast stayed with me. When I invited my family, I didn't dress it up. I didn't say medal. I didn't list the chain of approvals. I said awards banquet because that's what it was. They heard small. I heard final confirmation that I no longer needed their scale to measure my life. The night before the ceremony, I pressed my dress blues carefully. Every crease sharp. Every detail correct. I wasn't performing. I was preparing. Like I always did. As I hung the uniform back up, I realized something quietly, without drama. If they never understood my job, that didn't make it less real. It just meant I'd finally stopped trying to translate my worth into a language they refused to learn. The morning of the awards banquet arrived the way most important days do, quietly, without fanfare. No sense of destiny. No dramatic music. Just an alarm at 0500, the familiar weight of routine, and the soft hum of the bass coming awake outside my window. I moved through my morning on autopilot.
Shower. Coffee.
Uniform laid out with the kind of care that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with respect. I checked each detail the way I always did. Ribbons aligned.
Shoes polished.
Insignia straight. When you spend years in the military, preparation becomes a language. It's how you say, "I take this seriously," without needing to announce it. At work, no one treated the day like anything special. That was normal, too. A quick "good luck tonight" from my supervisor. A nod from a colleague who knew what the ceremony meant, but didn't feel the need to dramatize it. Deadlines still existed. Emails still came in. The mission didn't pause for recognition. That steadiness grounded me. By late afternoon, I drove home and changed in silence. The apartment felt smaller with the uniform on, like the walls were leaning in to listen. I caught my reflection in the mirror and took a moment, not to admire myself, but to register the distance between who I was and who my family still thought I was. Then I picked up my phone. No new messages in the group chat. No last-minute change of heart. No. Maybe we can stop by after dinner. Just silence. Settled and complete.
I put the phone down and left.
The banquet was held on base, in a large hall I'd been in dozens of times for briefings and mandatory events. That night, it looked different. Tables were dressed simply. Flags stood at attention along the walls. A small stage had been set at the front, flanked by a podium and a screen for slides. Families filled the room in clusters, spouses adjusting jackets, kids fidgeting, parents looking around with that particular mix of pride and uncertainty that comes from being close to something formal and unfamiliar. I noticed those details because I always did. Observation had become second nature. I took my seat with my unit. There was an empty chair beside me that no one commented on. The ceremony followed a familiar rhythm. Opening remarks. A brief overview of the quarter. Recognition of collective efforts before individual names were called. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to be. The tone was measured, professional, earnest. When my name was called, I stood, walked to the stage, and accepted the medal with a handshake and a nod. The weight of it was reassuring in its solidity. Not symbolic.
Real.
There was polite applause. Smiles. Cameras from the base public affairs office capturing the moment for the official record. I returned to my seat and sat down, heart steady, breathing even. It was over in minutes. Afterward, people mingled briefly. Congratulations were exchanged. Someone joked about how long the speeches ran. Another person asked where my family was. Couldn't make it, I said simply. No one pressed. That more than anything felt like respect. I left early, slipping out before the room fully emptied. The parking lot was cool and quiet, the sky darkening into a deep, settled blue. I sat in my car for a moment, the medal resting on the passenger seat, its ribbon catching the overhead light. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt complete. The next morning, the base public affairs office posted the video. They always did. A short caption. A link to the full recording on YouTube. A few still photos attached. Nothing dramatic. Just documentation. Colleagues shared it. Family members of other recipients tagged each other. A friend from a previous assignment commented with a simple, well-deserved. I didn't share it myself. Around noon, I got a notification I didn't recognize. A comment under the video from someone with my last name. Not Rachel, but a distant cousin I barely spoke to. Wait, is this Emily Carter from Dayton? A minute later, another comment appeared. Isn't that your sister? She looks different in uniform. Someone tagged Rachel. That was how it reached them. Not through a television mounted above a bar. Not through a planned reveal. Through a link. A pause. A moment where curiosity overrode dismissal. I imagined Rachel sitting at the dinner table, phone in hand, the restaurant noise fading as the screen filled with a scene she'd chosen to skip. My father leaning over her shoulder, reading words he hadn't bothered to ask about. My mother watching quietly, her face doing that careful thing it did when she realized something important had slipped past her. There was no music cue, no freeze frame, just the slow, undeniable clarity of seeing me as I actually was, presented plainly, without my commentary or apology. I didn't know what they said to each other. I didn't need to. My phone stayed silent the rest of the day. And for the first time, that silence felt earned. The first message didn't come from my family. It came from a number I didn't recognize late that afternoon, while I was back at my desk, already buried in routine again. The subject line of the email was plain. No emojis. No excitement. Saw this and thought you should know. There was a link. I hesitated before opening it, not because I was afraid of what I'd see, but because I knew exactly what it was. The public affairs video. Stripped of context like evidence. When I clicked, the familiar frame appeared. The banner behind the stage. The podium. The flags. My name, lower third, clean and official. The sound was crisp. The pacing unhurried. Nothing sensational. Just documentation. I closed it and leaned back in my chair. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Rachel. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then my mother texted. Why didn't you tell us it was a medal? I stared at the words longer than necessary. Not because I didn't understand them, but because of what they implied. Not congratulations. Not we're proud. Just confusion edged with accusation, like the truth had arrived improperly packaged. I typed carefully. I told you what it was. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. You said awards banquet, she replied. We didn't realize it was like this, formal.
Public. Documented.
Another message followed, this time from my father. Asterisk, someone tagged Rachel under that video. People were asking questions. Asterisk, I could picture it clearly now. Rachel's phone lighting up at the table, a name tag in the comments, a cousin's casual recognition, the awkward pause when curiosity won, the volume in the restaurant fading as the video played on a small screen instead of a mounted TV. No grand reveal, just discomfort. We looked foolish, my father added. There it was.
Not I'm sorry.
Not I was wrong. Just the thing that mattered most to him. How it reflected on them. I exhaled slowly and replied, Asterisk, I didn't do anything to make you look anyway. I invited you. Asterisk, the response didn't come right away. When it did, it wasn't what I expected. Why didn't you explain better? My mother wrote. I felt something settle behind my eyes. Not anger, not sadness, but a kind of weary recognition. This was the same question they'd asked my whole life, framed differently every time. Asterisk, why didn't you make us understand? Why didn't you translate yourself into something easier for us to accept? Asterisk, I set my phone down and finished my workday. That night, I didn't hear from them again. The next morning, nothing. No calls. No texts. The group chat stayed quiet, frozen at the last message, like a door left ajar, but not crossed. Days passed. The internet did what it always does. The video gathered a modest number of views, comments from people on base, a few supportive notes from spouses of other service members. Nothing viral. Nothing dramatic. Just a record that existed and couldn't be taken back. I went on with my life. The first sign of movement came nearly 2 weeks later. It was my mother. She called mid-morning, which was unusual. She usually texted first. I watched the phone ring, considered letting it go, then answered. Hi, I said. Her voice sounded careful, measured. I just wanted to check in. I'm okay, I replied. I know, she said quickly. I mean, how's work? There it was. The tentative reach. Not an apology. Not a celebration. Just curiosity, fragile and unpracticed. It's busy, I said. Same as usual. She paused. Your father watched the video again, she added. He didn't say much. I'm not surprised. Another pause. He sent a link to his brother, she said. Didn't add anything. Just the link. I closed my eyes briefly. That was progress, in its own muted way. My father didn't speak easily about feelings. He shared articles instead. Links. Proof, without commentary. Okay, I said. After that, the contact stayed minimal but different. My mother texted once a week. Short questions, neutral tone, no demands. My father sent 2 messages over the next month. Both brief. Saw something about the Air Force on the news today. Thought of you. Rachel stayed silent. No apology arrived. No confession of regret. No dramatic turnaround. And strangely, that felt right. One evening, after another long day, I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand and realized something important. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for them to admit anything. Not for the right words. The shift had already happened. Not in them, but in me. They had seen the work. They had been forced to confront it without my help, without my framing. And now they were adjusting. Slowly. Awkwardly. Incomplete. That was as much as I was ever going to get. And for the first time, it was enough. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Nothing dramatic happened. No explosive arguments. No tearful reconciliations. Just space.
Real space this time.
Not the kind created by avoidance, but the kind shaped by acceptance. I noticed the difference in small ways. My mother stopped asking questions that carried an agenda. She didn't try to redirect my life back towards something she understood. Instead, She asked things she'd never asked before. How long my days were. Whether I liked my current assignment. If I had enough time to rest. The questions came haltingly, like a language she was still learning. My father remained distant, but not dismissive. That alone felt like a shift. When he texted, it was brief, practical, always about something external. An article, a photo, a mention of the Air Force on the news. He never said my name directly in those messages, but he didn't need to. I recognized them for what they were. Acknowledgments without vulnerability. The only kind he knew how to offer. Rachel stayed quiet. At first, I braced myself for her return. A message laced with sarcasm. A complaint about embarrassment. A reframing of events that put her back at the center. None of it came. Weeks passed. Then a month. I realized I didn't miss her voice in my head. That realization surprised me more than anything else. For most of my life, Rachel had been the measuring stick, the louder presence, the person I'd been compared to without consent. Even when I stopped competing, I'd still carried her shadow. Without her commentary, the silence felt lighter, less crowded. At work, nothing changed and everything did. I moved through my days with a steadiness that felt earned. The medal lived in a drawer in my apartment. Not hidden, just placed somewhere safe. Not everything needed to be on display to matter. That lesson had taken me years to learn, and I wasn't interested in unlearning it. One afternoon, I was walking back from a meeting when my supervisor caught up with me in the hallway. "Hey," she said, "how's your family doing?" I considered the question. "They're adjusting," I replied. She smiled knowingly. That's usually how it goes. It struck me then how many people around me had lived versions of this story. Not just in the military. Anywhere discipline and sacrifice didn't translate cleanly into dinner table conversation. Anywhere work mattered more than optics. Later that evening, my mother called again. "I talked to your aunt today," she said. She mentioned the video. I waited. She said, "It must have taken a lot of trust for your supervisor to put your name forward." My mother continued. "I didn't realize it worked like that." "It does," I said gently. Another pause, then quieter. I should have asked more. There it was. Not an apology, but an opening. "I'm here now," she added, almost like she was testing the words. "I know," I said. After we hung up, I sat with the feeling for a long time. Not relief. Not vindication. Just understanding. People don't always change because you explain yourself better. Sometimes they change because reality arrives without your permission and stays. I thought about the younger version of myself, the one who'd kept offering pieces of her life like proof, who'd waited for recognition that never came. If I could speak to her now, I wouldn't tell her to try harder. I'd tell her to stop translating. Because here's the truth, I learned too late to make it easier, but early enough to make it useful. You cannot force people to value what they've already decided to minimize. What you can do is live in a way that no longer requires their agreement. The distance between me and my family didn't disappear. It clarified. It took shape. And once it had a shape, it stopped hurting. It became something I could navigate. Something I could choose. And in that choice, I found a calm I'd never had before. There's a moment after a long day when the base quiets down in a particular way. The engines stop. The hallway's empty. The lights hum softly, steady and indifferent. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't ask anything of you. It just exists. That's when I usually take a breath and take stock. The ceremony had come and gone. The video had made its slow, unceremonious rounds. My family had adjusted. Awkwardly. Imperfectly. In their own time. Life moved forward because that's what life does, whether you're ready or not. What surprised me wasn't their reaction. It was mine. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel like I'd finally won anything. What I felt was steadiness. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that settles in after you stop performing for approval. I thought a lot about honor during that time. Not the kind printed on certificates or pinned to uniforms, but the quieter version, the one you live with. The one that shows up when no one is watching, when the metrics disappear and you're left alone with your choices. Honor, I realized, isn't something your family gives you. It's something you carry when you keep showing up anyway. My parents never sat me down and said, "We were wrong." They never used the words I once rehearsed hearing. They didn't have to.
Their shift was subtler than that.
Less satisfying, maybe, but more honest. My mother asked better questions. My father stopped minimizing. He didn't praise, but he didn't belittle either. In his world, that was a real change. Rachel remained distant. I stopped wondering what that meant. Because the truth was, I no longer needed resolution from her to move forward. There's a particular relief that comes when you stop expecting people to become who you needed them to be. It's not resignation, it's clarity. You see them as they are, not as a problem to solve, but as a boundary to respect. And boundaries, I learned, can be acts of love, too. I kept serving. I kept doing the work that mattered to me. I mentored younger airmen who reminded me of myself. Quiet, capable, unsure if their contributions were being noticed. I told them the truth I wished I'd heard sooner. Asterisk, you don't have to be loud to matter. You just have to be consistent. Asterisk, sometimes they'd nod, sometimes they wouldn't. Either way, the words were planted. On weekends, I'd visit my parents occasionally. The visits were different now. Calmer. Shorter. There was less posturing, fewer assumptions. We talked about neutral things. Weather, news, food. Occasionally, my work came up. Not as a point of contention, but as a fact. That was enough. One afternoon, my father handed me his phone without saying much. He'd pulled up an article about an Air Force unit supporting disaster relief. He pointed at it and said, "This kind of coordination matters." It wasn't about me, and somehow that made it mean more. I thought again about that drawer. The one where my early wins had gone to rest among forgotten manuals and loose batteries. For a long time, I believed that drawer defined my worth in my family, that being placed there meant I was temporary, replaceable, easy to overlook. Now I understood something different. That drawer was never about me. It was about what my family knew how to value at the time, and what they didn't. I didn't take my medal out often. It stayed where I put it, safe and unremarkable. When I looked at it, I didn't think about the ceremony or the comments or the link that traveled further than I expected. I thought about the long days, the quiet decisions, the trust placed in me when things were uncertain. That was the real reward. If you're listening to this and parts of it feel uncomfortably familiar, if you've ever invited people to see your life and watched them choose something else, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not required to convince anyone of your worth. Not your parents, not your siblings, not the people who only understand success when it looks like theirs. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for yourself, and for them, is to stop explaining and start living. People change slowly, if at all. Families adjust in increments, not leaps. And sometimes the best outcome isn't reconciliation, it's peace. The kind that comes from knowing who you are without needing consensus. I didn't need my family to stand up and clap. I needed to stand firm when they didn't. And in doing that, I found something far more durable than approval. I found myself. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between seeking validation and finding your own peace? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and tell me what part of this story resonated most, or if you've faced something similar. Let's keep this conversation going. And if you want to hear more stories about finding strength in unexpected places, consider subscribing. We share them regularly. Let's keep going together.